share it on our YouTube channel. And I want to welcome everybody here this morning. This is a series of plain talk that we've been having on different sectors of our economy, and we started it a lot because of COVID-19. But eventually we're going to have to transition to what do we do on the other side of this, or as we're coming out of the situation. I'm very excited this morning that we have Bill Hammerich, who is a Pro 15 member, former board member, and he is with Colorado Livestock Association. And we have Shawn Martini, who is with the Colorado Farm Bureau. So we kind of have a farmer crop produce and a livestock look at agriculture here. So let's just start out with each of you kind of telling about your association, a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into some questions. And Bill, we'll have you start.
Thank you, Kathy, and good morning, everyone. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Colorado Livestock Association. We're located here in Greeley, Colorado, although we currently are working remotely. We are a mixture of various species, primarily beef, both cow-calf and feed yard, dairy, as well as sheep feeders. And our primary focus day in, day out are any things related to legislation and or regulation. And in the regulatory part, primarily environmental things, both air and water.
Okay, Shawn.
Yeah, thanks for having me on this morning, Kathy. I'm Shawn Martini. I'm Vice President of Advocacy with the Colorado Farm Bureau. For those of you not familiar with us, Colorado Farm Bureau is the state's largest general agriculture organization. We represent every commodity in the agriculture industry and our rural communities across the state. We work primarily in the public policy space as an advocate for the agriculture industry generally. Also do a lot of promotion and education work, outreach to consumers and to producers, continuing education for producers, and also do a lot of work in the rural safety and health space, and leadership development and agricultural promotion as well. So I've been with Farm Bureau for about 8.5 years now, and now sit as Vice President of Advocacy. So I handle a lot of our external stakeholder relations and try and work with other businesses across the state of Colorado and other industries across the state of Colorado on ways that we can get the agriculture industry to work more closely with other businesses and important industries in the state, and also try and get some of those businesses and industries and other industry groups to take positions that fit a little bit closer with the needs of agriculture in rural Colorado.
All right. Well, I'm going to start off with a question, and we'll just kind of go from there. One of the things during this is we've got our borders closed, not only contiguous borders, but everybody else evidently we're not letting in, but especially our borders with Canada and Mexico. How has that affected your membership as far as labor goes to get our crops in the ground, or as far as exporting to get our products to market? And Shawn, do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. So the borders are closed, you know, with several exceptions to human travel. We can still get product back and forth across, particularly food that's recognized as essential by everybody. So food shipments back and forth are still going. With regards to labor, of course, it was a real concern early on. The U.S. shut its consulates really all over the world, but particularly for us in the United States, the Mexican consulates that do the processing for H-2A visas were originally going to be closed and not processing any visas going forward. So we've worked with folks in the administration, the U.S. State Department, and USDA to ensure that we can continue having enough consular staff available to process visa applications for both returning and new H-2A visa applicants. And these are folks coming in to work in all areas of the agriculture industry. And while we still have some concerns about the flow and whether or not people are going to take the opportunity with being concerned about potentially being infected, but also ensuring that the consular staff that we've been told is going to be there is in fact there and processing visas at the clip that we need them to ensure that we get the workforce that we need remains to be seen, but it looks like things are pointing in the right direction. One of the things that's helpful is while we would like to have all these visas processed already, a lot of the crews that will be coming in, particularly in Colorado, aren't quite here yet. And so we've got a little bit more time going forward before we get really into crunch time and really need to lean on DHS and the State Department to make sure that those visas get processed. We're getting to the point though where it's got to happen, and like I said, we're concerned, but things should be in a fairly good place to get us the folks we need. And I know Bill will have some thoughts on this as it pertains particularly to the dairy sector as well.
Hey, Bill.
Thank you, Shawn. I think if we kind of look back, labor has been an issue quite some time prior to the outbreak of COVID. So I think that in general, most livestock operations and specifically dairy have learned to cope to some degree. But I think from those that I talk to, at least around here in Colorado, that probably the labor situation today is not significantly worse than it was prior to. And I think there might have been a tendency on the part of those who had jobs, decided that they would stay with the job that they had rather than run the risk of moving on to something else that might or might not be there. So yes, labor continues to be an issue. I think it'll be an issue after the COVID thing passes, hopefully for quite some time. Relative to exports, I think that we have continued to enjoy, and Shawn has already touched on this, as far as food products coming into the country, specifically in Colorado, and our ability to move those outside our borders. I don't think there's been a lot of bottlenecks or problems in continuing what we already had in place.
So along those lines, Bill, I heard something on the news and I only caught part of it about livestock not being allowed to come into the country. Did I hear something completely wrong, or is there a story behind that? It was
Okay.
imports.
You're talking live animals, right?
Right.
Yeah. I think we still continue with those countries that we had previously. And let's talk about Canada, Mexico. I think as long as all health regulations are observed, quarantines are pretty strict and in place, I think we can continue to do that. Certainly those countries that prior to this outbreak that had restrictions on the importation or exportation of live animals, those are probably a little more onerous today than they were prior. But again, I think it's a little bit like some of our products, processed products. I think we continue to have business kind of as usual.
Okay. Following along those lines, your livestock feeders, have you noticed a holdup in them being able to get their meat processed? I know here in Morgan County, Cargill has stayed open, but I guess around the country you see it as an issue. Is it so much here in Colorado?
Kathy, I think this is kind of a good news, bad news story. You know, the bad news, I think, relative to that is behind us. I say that with my fingers crossed. I think the worst is over there. Today, at least on a nationwide basis, on average weekly, we are now back to probably about somewhere between 75 and 80% of what the processing capacity was prior to all of the employees that tested positive or were asked to stay home for a time. So the bad news is that yes, we continue to have a bottleneck in that area. We're not back to full capacity. The good news is that we seem to have rebounded off of the bottom from that 40–50% daily production back now to 75 or 80. And hopefully that will continue to increase, although personally I think we are going to, as long as we have the COVID protection protocols in place, I don't think that we're going to anytime soon get back to what we had become accustomed to in the quote unquote 100% of capacity.
Okay. Shawn, how are the crops? Are they getting in the ground on schedule? And I don't know that COVID necessarily has a big play in that, unless it's in a farm family or something. Weather's been a little different this year. So what are you seeing on the ground as far as spring planting?
Looks like most crops and most planting is going along pretty well. Of course, we nationwide at least have not had any huge weather events that have prevented planting like we had last year. In Colorado, everything seems to be going in the ground on schedule. One of the things that's been nice, and CoBank put out a report about this a few weeks ago, is that despite some of the challenges that COVID is causing to the broader economy, it looked like the ag suppliers sector that provide us all of our inputs, both on the livestock and the crop side, were positioned well to fare sort of the downturn and the lockdowns across the country. So that helped ensure that folks who are putting crops in the ground could get a hold and source the inputs that they typically would in a normal year, and that helped keep planting going along in the way that we would anticipate it to. I think just more broadly, one of the other indicators of that is that USDA's last supply and demand estimate report and prospective plantings report showed that we might have I think it was going to be the second largest number of corn acres planted ever this year. When the next report comes out, we expect that to be revised down a little bit. But it certainly looks like everybody is ready to get going and is not having trouble getting the crop in the ground. Now, what that says about prices is a little bit different story, but in terms of actually conducting field operations, things are going along at pace.
Well, so that brings me to my next question of both of you. With there being a higher demand for product, with the grocery store shelves being empty and rationing meat and all of that, do you anticipate higher markets at the ground level, or is it going to be a lower market for us as we move into the fall?
I can jump in with that real quick, Kathy, and jump over to Bill too. And in terms of the outlook broadly for the agriculture sector as a whole, it's not positive. USDA is anticipating a fairly significant drop in farm income for 2020. And it's unfortunate because last year we showed a little bit of progress coming off of our about a 7-year downturn in nationwide net farm income. Looking forward, it's been there's been some bright spots and some difficulties with COVID. You mentioned a lot of people shifting their purchasing to the grocery stores and buying more product there. Largely the panic buying that we saw initially as the lockdown started has abated. But still, because restaurants continue to be closed, people are buying much more and spending almost 90% of their food dollar at the grocery store, whereas they would have only spent about 37% of that food dollar at the grocery store prior to the lockdowns. And obviously that's because restaurants are closed. That shift has caused what most of what we've seen in the dislocations in the supply chain, and as a result in the market in terms of prices. Is just having to shift around how we produce and process food and get it to the consumer and in what form. And that's caused a lot of the empty shelves. And then of course you had plants coming offline, slaughter plants coming offline, and causing some supply and demand disruptions at the grocery case and further up the supply chain on the meat side. Going forward, because of that large prospective plantings report, because of a significantly or a really significant positive year in other grain producing and commodity producing countries around the world. And I'm looking at particularly for us, South America, as it pertains to corn and soy. They're planning to bust the bins down there this year. That's going to continue to put downward pressure on prices here in this country. And in addition to that, because of the global recession that we're currently seeing, the U.S. And its various assets, whether it's government bonds and government debt or private debt, a number of other different financial instruments, really has become a safe haven for the global financial system, and that's really driven the dollar up in a really strong way. And of course, that's negative to our exports, and will continue to put downward pressure on commodity prices going forward. When we have a real strong dollar like that, that acts as a signal for other countries that are competitors for us in the commodity space to go ahead and plant more and try and capture that market share when it is more expensive for for other countries to buy those commodities from us than it would be from them. And so they will take that signal from a strong dollar and from strong plantings reports here in this country, and it reinforces strong plantings in those other countries in order for them to capture market share. So going forward, we really don't anticipate any appreciable or significant increase in commodity prices, at least getting anything over what we experienced prior to the significant drop that we saw, as much as 45% for some commodities as a result of the lockdowns and COVID-19, at least through the third quarter and into the fourth quarter of 2020.
Bill, different perspective maybe from your industry?
From the livestock perspective, this again is kind of a good news, bad news thing. You know, the bad news was that we did experience shortages. Shawn alluded to some empty shelves, if you will. But I think now as we look back, that was a temporary phenomenon. I think the good news is that we have shown ourselves that the production of food in the United States, yes, we might have these little blips and glitches along the way for whatever reason. This time it's a disease, other times it might be weather or other things. But I think people should take some away a good feeling that you're not going to starve in this country, that we can produce, we can feed this nation as well as others outside our border. Relative to prices, during that panic buying and the shortages of things, prices rose significantly. And this has caused a lot of consternation in the beef community from the standpoint that packers were making absolutely historical margins on their purchases. But again, that seems to have been a short-lived phenomenon. Today, the free market is adjusting itself. Producers are getting better prices for their product. We're now back where a live animal is bringing $1.15, $1.20. The cutout value of the corresponding carcass continues to decline again as we increase our production in these packing facilities. So I think it's, yes, we had a lot of angst and heartburn at the time, but I think we can kind of take a pause here today and look back and say that things are adjusting and adjusting for the better.
Well, and as a livestock ranch girl from way back, I guess that story is not any different now than it was 50 years ago.
The prices are different, conditions are different, but bottom line, you're right, it's the same.
Yeah. I have a question here from Dusty Johnson. They're wanting to know how your groups are helping to inform the public that the food being produced is safe. And Dusty's right. There's a lot of fear that all of this disease is being spread through the packing plants, like the Cargills and the Tysons and that type of thing. And that they're assuming the meat is being contaminated by COVID. Is there anything in particular you're doing to reassure the public on the safety of the food produced in our country?
Kathy, as far as CLA is concerned, I think we have regurgitated or shared amongst our membership or on social media, primarily relying on CDC and the information that they're putting out there. To more directly answer Dusty's question, I think the evidence is pretty clear that yes, the disease is prevalent in the processing facilities, but that you can rest assured that at least from the animal protein side of things, that there is absolutely, if not zero, minimal risk that you are going to contact the disease because it came through one of those facilities.
Shawn, anything to add on that?
Yeah, from our side, certainly that's definitely something that we've been reinforcing with people from the start of all of this, and that was some of the questions that came up initially when the lockdowns happened, and people were trying to get on the learning curve in terms of what this disease was and what it was like and how it was transmitted. And we continually reminded people at that point that there was no evidence to point that you could get it through food. I think that's pretty well settled science now. And just in terms of what we call when you're measuring media and national conversation, just in terms of share of voice, is a sort of a metric we use to measure how much traction a particular topic is getting out there. Even when we went through the height of plant closures and the president using the Defense Production Act to reopen plants again while they were having some outbreaks and difficulties with employees getting the disease and getting sick, the share of voice really never got worryingly high. We, of course, all on this call hear it in our community quite a bit, and concerns that consumers have, and some of them did have concerns and were subject to misinformation about how the disease was transmitted, and just a misunderstanding of the story about what was happening in packing plants. But I think the bright piece here is that it never really got too terribly high within the national conversation by the various ways that we can track that through the media and social media and others. But even when that happened, I think Bill's organization and Cattlemen's and Farm Bureau and all the commodity organizations really did everything we could to pile in and ensure people that it wasn't in fact being transmitted through the food itself. It was person to person, and will continue to be so in the future.
Bill, you had something else?
Yeah, I'd just like to kind of coattail onto what Shawn said. I think he is spot on right there, and people should be concerned, okay, especially if they're not familiar. But I think we haven't picked up a significant amount of concern about animal protein products and the disease. I guess not to diminish people's concern, but I think you should approach the preparation of your food today, be it animal proteins or vegetables, with the same precautions that you would have prior to. So wash your vegetables and cook your hamburger to 168 degrees and you'll be fine. Very
good. Well, we've reached the end of our time, and we didn't even get to all the questions today. But I want to thank Bill Hammerich from Colorado Livestock Association and Shawn Martini from Colorado Farm Bureau, both very much for being our guests today. And I hope you all have a great Memorial Day weekend, but stay safer at home. Talk to you all later.
Thank you, Kathy. Everybody take care.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here.